All right, so here's what happened. I went to the mall and I saw this Kurt Geiger purse that was just beautiful. I mean, I've never bought a fancy purse myself before, and this was the first one where I was like, oh, I really want it. It wasn't crazy expensive. I think it was a couple $100s, but that's still expensive, you know? But I loved like the pastel metallic gradient feel look of it, and I thought, it'll match a bunch of things because it's multicolored, And I thought about it and I thought about it. I saw it a few more times. I thought about it some more, and not have thought about it for too long because then it just was not being sold anymore. And I was like, oh, okay, I lost by chance. And it was just a very specific look, and it's made of leather, and I don't really know how to work with leather. However, I did also then see a Loeffler Randall purse that was also really cute and came in a bunch of colors, but not rainbow, which is what I really wanted. So I thought, well, I think maybe I could sew something that at least looks kind of similar to the Loeffler Randall one. And I also have some leftover pastel rainbow kind of shiny fabric from the Vampire's Wife caftan that I made before. So I thought, what if I just mush these two things together and get like a rainbow purse baby, something that would be the result of Kurt Geiger's rainbow purse combined with Loeffler Randall's little bow purse. So that's what I made. For the pattern, I traced out the shape and then printed it out in multiple sizes to figure out what size I needed to fit my phone. But I also didn't want it to be too much bigger than that because I didn't want a giant clutch. So it ended up being smaller than the big version they have, but bigger than the mini version they have. And it ended up being about this size here. So hopefully those measurements help. And after I figured out what size I wanted and taped together the pieces, I traced out a 1/2 inch seam allowance and cut it out. Measured the seam allowance for the whole thing around and cut it out, and then I separated the top from the bottom to add seam allowance between those two pieces too. This was where I was briefly considering this pleated sequin fabric to make the purse, which would have been a good choice too, but I really wanted the rainbow. So I used this leftover ruffle from the caftan I made and gathered the other side too to see how it would look. And it looked pretty good. And it was like the right size too, It just happened to be the right size. So that's what I went with. All right, so I'm just running this through on the highest tension on the machine and the biggest straight stitch to just gather it. Let's see if I can hold this while I do this. Then it comes out gathered pretty well back there, so I'm just gonna keep going. Once I gathered both sides, I steamed the gathers to make them lie more nicely. Like I tried ironing them, but that flattened them too much, so I just put a thin cotton fabric on top to give it a barrier and steamed them because it is polyester, so I just didn't want to accidentally melt it, and that worked pretty well. Okay, so that was the outer fabric sorted out, but I also needed to figure out what I needed for the structural layers, and I didn't want to buy anything new for this. I just wanted to use what I had because I have stuff I have to get through, you know? So I decided to use this pink flannel that I had because I figured the fabric is not sheer, but I figured like maybe a pink would be good. And I also have this kind of overspray gold cotton. And I also had this kind of stiffer netting material. So those were the three I ended up choosing to be like the stiffer layers. And I also had some sewable boning that I hadn't used before. I used that, and then I also used this pink ribbon, kind of like a stiffer pink ribbon that I had. And yeah, and those were all of the layers that I used to add some heft to this purse. Otherwise I'd just be flopping all around, you know? Okay, so I cut 2 pieces of the gold cotton for the body, 1 for either side, and 4 pieces for the handle, 2 for either side. And then when I was looking at the netting, I realized that it was much stretchier in one direction than the other. So I ended up layering it. So one layer was stretchier horizontally and one layer was stretchier vertically so that it would be sturdier and less stretchy overhaul. And I cut 4 pieces for the body, 2 for either side, and 4 pieces for the handle, 2 for either side. And then I cut the pink cotton flannel, 1 for either side of the body and 1 for either side of the handle. So 2 for the body and 2 for the handle. The real one probably has like a frame that you pop open and close, like for a clutch, but I don't have that, and I want to use what I have. So I do have this ribbon. I think it's like a twill. Yeah, I don't know what kind of ribbon it is, but it has like that ridge, and feels pretty strong. So I think now I'm thinking maybe I sew this onto the flannel first, like in the center, hopefully avoid the seam allowance, and then maybe put this on it on each side just for stability. I think that would be good. So let me try doing that. So I ended up eyeballing all the measurements for the ribbon and for the sewable boning, and that worked out fine. I just made sure to have it be short enough to avoid the seam allowance, and for the ribbon I cut off the corners at the top for the curvy bits at the top of the handle, and I cut 2 pieces of the boning to help with the structure of the handle, and I trimmed off the ends so that they're more rounded, so hopefully they don't like poke out over time. And I hadn't used sewable boning before, but it was so easy to use that now I want to use it all the time. So that sewn up pretty well. Now I'm thinking to keep the shape, I might just add one tiny one on each side here too. And I'm hoping this is not too close to the seam allowance, but I'll figure that out. So let me cut 4 more of these and sew them on. After I sewed on the boning, I had to iron it and weigh it down with a book and the iron on top to help make it lie flat. It just curved because it was stored wrapped up. Again, I eyeballed the length of the ribbon for the body also. I think it ended up being about 8 inches. So I cut 4 of those, 2 for either side, and then I arranged them in like a shallow X for either side, and then I cut boning about the same length. Again, 2 for either side, so 4 total, and made sure to round off the edges there too. After it was sewed on, which by the way, I sewed the ribbon and the boning on in one go for both the body and the handle, I ironed and weighed down the body the same way I did the handles because that worked out well. Okay, now that everything is ironed and smushed flat, I am going to layer and flatline everything. So I think I'm going to do it this side in. So I'm going to have to do a lining inside anyway, I think. So I want to have the little extra padding from the flannel. So I flatlined all 4 of the boned flannel pieces, the 2 handle pieces and the 2 body pieces. So it was flannel, then the 2 layers of netting in the opposite directions of stretch, and then the gold cotton. I also trimmed down the netting layers so that I could use the little clips to hold all the pieces together. And then I sewed it on the machine using the presser foot as a guide. With the flatlining done, I moved on to the outer layer, the gathered layer of fabric that's actually going to be visible at the end. And I didn't have a real plan for this, so I just ended up basically just zhuzhing it around until it looked right. So I did a couple of pleats towards the center top and flared them out a bit towards the bottom because that seemed to be the general pattern of the original purse. I'm sure it would have been a lot easier with micro pleated fabric instead of gathered fabric, but I worked with what I had, you know. And it was quite difficult to sew. Like, I clipped everything on in the way that I thought it would look best, and then I had to sew it really carefully. Like, I did the straight parts first, the top and bottom, sewing from the center out, and then center out going the other way for each side. and that helped keep the gathering more regular, more where I wanted it to be, but not completely because I kept wanting to move around. Probably would have been easier had I thrown in another gathering stitch instead of just using the edges of the ruffle that I already had, you know. But after I did the top and the bottom of the body, then I did the sides and the curves. And there was a lot of seam ripping and finagling, but I got it done. And then I did the other side also before I moved on to the handle part. Okay, here's what I got yesterday. It's not perfect. Like, this is definitely still angled out a bit more than I wanted, but it's definitely in a good enough territory. And the last bit of ruffle that I had left over was actually just a bit too small. So I let go of some of the gathering to lengthen it. And then I put both of the handle sides that were boned onto it and sewed them on. Again, I had to be really careful and do the straights first and then did the more curvy and like different little sections after that. Yeah, so as I was going, I was putting each piece of the ruffle on and then cutting away the excess. So for the two body pieces, got the pick of the ruffle when I was doing them. But I think that worked out for the best because the handle looked completely fine, and it was more important that I had enough to do the body gathering correctly. And so yeah, then the exterior fabric was in place. All right. Got these sewn on. I have to cut them apart still. Okay, so now I'm left with the part of the handle on top that's supposed to go on the inside. And I was gonna do another gathered section for this, but I'm just not going to now because I don't want to deal with it. So I have these smaller scraps that just barely fit. Like, this is not gonna make it all the way to the corner, but I think it'll be fine. And yeah, so I'm gonna flatline it just flat like this, and like this does not match the vertical stripes on the rest of this, but I don't care. I think it'll be fine. And this is the way they fit on here. I have some larger scraps, but I'd rather save those and use the small bits I have. Once I was done flatlining everything, I trimmed down the excess on all of the pieces. After trimming the handle pieces down, I clipped the gathered pieces to the lining pieces and sewed the top and the sides, leaving a 1/2 inch opening at the bottom to attach to the body of the purse later. After sewing the handle pieces together, I turned it right side out and clipped it to a body piece of the purse, sewing the gathered section of the handle and leaving the lining section free. All right, that was really hard. It's just really thick, and then I kept getting it wrong here and try to pencil in a line here because it kept not being even. Anyway, I had to unpick it and redo it a couple times, or a few times, and I had to do the whole thing multiple times because it's just too thick to get under even the walking foot in the middle. So it would just always be at an angle, so I had to like go from the beginning each time. But yeah, I think this is firmly in the category of good enough now. When I sewed this part on, I flipped it over without cutting the seam allowance on the inside because I figured it'll help give it some more structure up here. All right, I'm in the position of not perfect, but not terrible. So yeah, so I think I do want to leave the seam allowance up here because it adds some sturdiness, a little something to the top here. All right, but it is coming along. Looks more purse-like now, at least. I ended up sewing the seam allowance up into the handle to the ribbon because it was looking bulky facing down into the body. All right, my fingers hurt. I should really get what is it called, a thimble? It's just hard to push through so many layers, but I have it sewn up. I have both sides sewn up. I don't know if they're super even, but it's the best I could do. All right, so this is really thick. I really don't know how this is gonna go. This is really, really thick. I sewed as close as I could to each side here, but I couldn't get that far in. So anyway, I guess the next step is going to be to sew these together, and maybe I'll sew in some loops or something. Okay, before I sew the two sides together, I thought if I want to add a strap to it, if I can't add a strap to it, I need some loops. So I did have this like flat metal ribbon stuff. So I cut out 4 loops of them. I didn't measure them. I don't know how big these are. I don't know, a couple inches, and then folded them. And I am just going to do 2 on each side. So I think I'm just gonna sew them on to here, like maybe here. I don't know, like an inch below, maybe. And maybe I'll make a hole in the lining inside to let them come out, because it'll be easier to just sew these on by machine. Once I secured the loops, I clipped the 2 completed sides of the purse together and sewed them. I did some reinforcement zigzags on here because this was already fraying. Let's see, I couldn't get all the way to the edge because the seam allowance is too thick, and the foot doesn't want to go over this far. So I'm just gonna see what the situation is. Oh, it's kind of cute. All right, so these sides I think I might have to do by hand, and then I have to figure out a lining, or maybe I can put a snap in. All right, I guess the first thing is to do the hand sewing here. So I was able to do a hand stitch up until the seam here, where the foot of the machine can go. So that hurt my hands. I was looking to a thimble or something, but I was looking at this, and this seems to be holding up well to keep the seam allowance up into the handle area. And I think I'm having trouble keeping it like this. So I think I'm going to try to see if I can hand stitch this down here to the ribbon as well. I should have done this earlier, but I didn't think about it until this worked, so. So I moved to the bed so I could be my laptop, and I finished one side here, but I don't know, I think it's worse than not having it. Like, this one shows a bit on the top, not as bad as it did before, which I'm wondering if it's because this is tacked up now. But it's just lying nicer. It's not pulling as much. This side, like, there's too much tension, and it's warped the top here, which I don't like as much. So I think I'm just gonna take it out and hope I can just use the lining inside. I don't mind if this shows a bit, you know. I think it's fine. Top stitching is still an option, I guess, but not really because it's just way too thick up here. So yeah, I'm gonna take it out and maybe accept the lining showing a bit. It's not the worst, you know. I had some leftover beige crepeback satin that I ended up using for the lining for the body. So I cut out the body pieces and ironed it and sewed it together with the shiny sides facing each other. And I left an opening on either side for the loops in the seam. So about a 1/2 inch down, I left a 3/4 inch opening. Alright, I added an extra line of stitching just as a reinforcement, and so now I'm just going to shove this in here, try to get the loops through. I sewed the seam allowance on either side of the opening, and I did the tack on top, so hopefully that's good enough. And I'm just going to try to get the loops through to get this situated. And alright, so actually I think before I sew these together, I think what I might do is actually sew this down to the seam allowance here to like give it a little tension. I'm just gonna keep going. I'm probably gonna go not all the way here. I'll probably stop around here actually, so that I have space here to close up these sections I didn't close earlier. It doesn't look the prettiest, but I do think it helped out without pulling too much. I think that side probably looks a little better. I think it's literally, I did the same thing, it's just one side just was sewn a little differently. Like I didn't do it perfectly, so that's fine. And yeah, it shows on the inside. It's gonna keep showing even when I put the lining in, but I don't care. It's fine. It's on the inside. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but this is my first time making a bag and I'm using what I have. So it's fine, you know. So I think the next thing I'm gonna do is probably like sew up the sides here. Like I had left this open to sew it on, but now it's pulling apart here, so I'm just gonna go through and try to do some invisible stitching on the sides here at the top of the handle, so that hopefully that'll be taken care of. And once that's down, then I can put the lining in with some quick whip stitches. I don't even know what these are called. These are just literally just whatever got it on there, and it says pulling it. I don't care. Would I like it to be perfect? Sure, but I want it to work more than I want it to look perfect. So, all right, so let me do those ends. Okay, so my hands are hurting sewing the purse. So I bought this thimble set on Amazon. So I've never used a thimble before, so to find out, it has a bunch of different kinds. So let's open it. Alright, let's try this one. Alright, I'm working in bed again, needle punched into the cushion while watching YouTube, and I finished hand sewing the sides, all of those 4 parts, and now I'm working on the lining. So I matched up the sides and made sure the loops were through, like the loops that I might use. Where is it? I hope it's through still. Yeah, there it is. Right there. I don't know if it's visible. So yeah, there it is. So make sure the loops were through and tacked down the side seams and the centers here so that I could quickly sew this on following that guide I sewed on at a 1/2 inch, so I would know where to fold it. So I'm just gonna go through and sew it real fast. This looks worse on camera than in person, but I don't really care either way. It's on the inside, so it's not going to show. So I'm just going to get this on here real quick and not worry too much about how it looks. Because again, it's on the inside and it's mine, so it'll be fine. It's done. It definitely looks a little bit like Frankenstein-y. Not the neatest thing I've ever done. But I think it's fine. I just wanted to get it done. I'm at the point where I want to finish this thing, you know? I'm also thinking about what I have and what could I use for a fastening in here, because I don't know if it wants to stay together. Alright, excuse the laundry in the background here. So I have snaps and I have hooks and eyes, like the skirt ones. That's all I really have in terms of fasteners. I thought about doing a tie, but I think that's going to be even worse. So I'm just going to try these snaps, which I know is not the right way to go. If I were to make another purse, I think I would just buy a frame. I think I'll make things easier, but I want to use what I have, and this is what I got. So, yeah, let's see how this goes. Alright, so the snaps are on. They look kind of Frankenstein-y, but they're holding it closed. It's really impractical, so I would definitely buy a purse closure next time. And I think the original one has one of those ones that you can pop open, like those glasses cases. Like something stiff here that you squeeze open, but I mean, it works, technically. So, yeah. Maybe I should go through and cut these real fast, actually. Closing it is even stupider. So if I do the middle one, I'll have to think like 3 times before I actually open it and use what's inside. So that's okay. It's not for everyday use, but still, if I make a purse again, this will not be how I make it. So yeah, snaps are done. So I need to make the bow. Also, I did realize that it did not keep the shape I wanted. Here's the original shape. It's supposed to be straight across and then come down kind of like a curve, but instead it dips down a bit at the top and then kind of comes down. So this part should have been straight and a little higher, but there just wasn't enough support in here for it to stay in shape. That's okay. I still like how it looks. So now I'm gonna work on the bow. I think the bow is supposed to be as wide as where this comes down. So from here to here, which is, yeah, maybe like 6 3/4 inches, something like that. So I think I'll double that. So maybe not quite 14 inches. And the width is supposed to be like this, I think. I'm gonna go check on it and then figure out how to cut it out. I think it's 2 pieces. Like there's one piece like this and then a piece that actually ties it together. I don't think it's actually tied like an actual bow. I ended up cutting 3 pieces total for the bow. One 24 inches by 6 inches and 2 14 inches by 6 inches, with the striping of the fabric going the length of those rectangular pieces because I wanted some contrast between the bow and the body of the purse. Originally, I cut 1 piece for the bow part of the 14 inches by 6 inches, but it wasn't full enough. I think because this fabric isn't micro pleated like the original, so it doesn't have the same amount of body. So I had to do 2 of those. And what I ended up doing was sewing all 3 of the rectangular pieces into long tubes. And I didn't finish the ends of them because the original has kind of an undone bow finish, which I think is like important for the look. So I left the edges unfinished and I put the 2 shorter pieces together. I folded them in half lengthwise and put them together and used a piece of elastic to tie them into place. I was going to sew them up into the scrunch I wanted, but it was just too thick to get under the machine. I should have probably just used a piece of the same fabric because the elastic ended up showing later, but I'll fix that at some point. And the tie, I just tied it on there. And after I hand sewed it on the whole thing onto the purse, I then trimmed it to what looked like the right length. It wasn't secure enough until I sewed through the top handle part. So I poked the needle all the way through parts of the bow and then through the top handle into the interior and back through again just to keep it secure. Otherwise, it was drooping too much. Okay, so I got this purse Mercer Rack. It came with this chain that I'm hoping I can use for the purse because it has little clippies. The chain worked perfectly, and then I was finally done. how this purse turned out. I mean, it's not perfect by any means. The closure definitely is not ideal. I will definitely look into some other form of closure for making another purse. And it got a little bit shaped differently from what I intended. But it's great. I love it. I love the size of it. It's the perfect size for a phone and incidentals, just for a night out. It's not like an everyday purse. And it just looks so cute when it's in bright light. When there's a flash or a bright light on it, it just looks like it glows, which I love. And I love the bow, and even like the gathering. The pleating would have been a lot easier to work with, but the gathering I think looks really cute too. And I do think, like, I do wish there was a way for me to do like a shorter handle on it easily. I was able to loop the long chain, so it kind of works as a handle if I want to just hold it in my hand. I could hold it like a clutch. Like, I think the original is a clutch. So that's also a possibility. It just feels a little more awkward. Probably because the bow is right there. If there was no bow, then you can just hold it from the handle on top. And also, like, I definitely should have not used elastic to hold the two different parts of the bow together, because the knot shifted and now it can show. It shifted over so the elastic shows sometimes. I can fix that. Like, I can probably just put another fabric piece on top of that. I should have just used a piece of the fabric I was already using to loop it together, and that would have worked fine, but I'll fix that at some point. Probably, maybe. I mean, it's even less visible in person, honestly, because it's kind of ridged and the fabric is ridged too, so it doesn't really bother me that much, to be honest. I only noticed it when I was editing, so yeah, we'll see if I fix it. And yeah, and I mean, this was great. I feel like I got a version that didn't exist, you know? So it got like a size that was bigger than the mini and smaller than the large size of this purse they make. So it's like the size that I actually wanted. And it's rainbow, which is what I wanted from the beginning. And I was able to use things I already had, so I didn't have to spend more money. So I think this was a win-win. So yes, would recommend. Maybe not with this closure though.